Continuing coverage from overseas, cardinals in the Vatican City are sizing each other up ahead of the vote to pick the next pope.
Let's bring you some breaking news now. And the Pope has released an audio message to thank people for their prayers. The Pope, of course, has been in hospital fighting double pneumonia for almost 3 weeks now. Tonight, the Vatican said it will stop issuing daily updates on his condition because, as they put it, the stability of the clinical picture.
The Catholic Church is at a crossroad once again in its history after the death of Pope Francis. As people talk about who will become the next pope, one name is becoming more popular: Luis Antonio Tagle.
Philippine Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle is tapped to help the Vatican prepare for the May 7 conclave, the closed-door election of a new pope.
All of this is because of a lost letter Pope Francis wrote to Tagle. What were the contents of this recently revealed letter? Join us as we discuss everything you need to know about the lost letter Pope Francis wrote to Luis Antonio Tagle and its implication. Pope Francis' letter to Luis Antonio Tagle. The moment the letter came to light, people began to realize why it had been kept private for so long. Pope Francis had written something deeply personal, not just to a man he trusted, but to someone he had been shaping for years. This wasn't just a thank you note or a routine letter. It was full of lessons, reminders, and directions for the future of the Church. At its heart, the letter was about leadership, real leadership, the kind that doesn't stand on stages or wear gold. Pope Francis made it clear that leadership in the Church should look a lot more like service than power. He wrote about the kind of leader who listens more than he speaks, who steps down instead of standing tall, and who meets people where they are. This wasn't just about leading Catholics, it was about being with them. The Pope had more to say. He didn't want a leader who rules from above, but one who walks with the people. The Pope's message was simple. Real authority in the Church comes from kindness, not control. He explained that the loudest voices don't always carry the most truth.
Easter Sunday surprise from Pope Francis, weeks after he was released from the hospital, delivering a message.
Pope Francis appeared in St. Peter's Square right after Easter Mass. He blessed the crowds. He wished everyone a happy Easter.
In fact, the letter talked about how today's world is already full of shouting, politicians, media, influencers. People are tired of noise. What they're really looking for is someone who listens, someone who stays calm, and someone who leads by example. Pope Francis told Tagle that the Church can't be another place of shouting. It has to be a place where people are heard, even in silence. Another key part of the letter focused on humility. He was pointing to humility as the most important trait a church leader can have. The Pope warned that pride can make people in the Church feel distant from those they're meant to serve. He explained that when leaders act like royalty, people stop trusting them. But when leaders act like family, people start opening up again. In his words, the Pope wrote that people don't follow titles, they follow trust. That line set the tone for everything else in the letter. It was a reminder that being in charge doesn't mean being above others. It means carrying their concerns. It means being available. Pope Francis made it clear that the Church isn't supposed to impress people, it's supposed to reach them. That starts with having leaders who know how to be human. A large section of the letter was also about poverty, not just money, but the experience of being left behind. Pope Francis wrote that too many church leaders talk about the poor from a distance. They give sermons, but they don't show up. He told Tagle that this can't continue. The Church has to walk with the poor, not just speak about them. The Pope said that if the gospel never reaches the street, it's just words on a page. In that part of the letter, he talked about what people really need. He said the poor aren't looking for more speeches. They're looking to be seen. That line hit hard. It stripped away the idea that church work is just about planning or preaching. It brought things back to the street, to the real world. Francis said the Church has to stand in the mud sometimes. It has to show up where life is hard, not just where it's comfortable. The letter then moved into something even more difficult: change. The Pope admitted that change can make people nervous, especially inside the church. But he didn't see it as a threat. He saw it as part of growth. He told Tagle that the church must hold on to its roots, but it must also grow new branches. This wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about making space for the future. Pope Francis reminded Tagle that the church cannot stay frozen. He said when the world moves on and the church doesn't, it gets left behind. That's a hard truth, but the Pope wasn't afraid to say it. He encouraged a way of thinking that many church leaders still resist, one that opens doors instead of closing them. He wanted Tagle to keep traditions alive, but never let them block progress.
Luis Antonio Cardinal Tagle was tasked to assist the prelate appointed by the late Pope Francis to oversee Vatican City's administrative functions during the papal vacancy.
One of the more emotional parts of the letter came when Pope Francis talked about young people. He was worried that the next generation no longer feels connected to faith. He wrote that if the church loses the youth, it loses its future. That's why he pushed Tagle to speak with them, not just at them. He said that young people don't want perfect leaders, they want real ones. Leaders who understand their world, leaders who are willing to listen. The Pope explained that today's young people face things no previous generation did. Constant noise from social media, rising anxiety, a sense of being ignored. If the church keeps preaching the same way it did 50 years ago, the message won't land. Pope Francis told Tagle that the church must learn how to speak in today's language. Not change the truth, but change how it's shared. Toward the end of the letter, Pope Francis turned his attention to crisis. He said, real leadership is shown when things fall apart. During pandemics, natural disasters, wars, those are the moments when people remember who stood beside them. He wrote that when storms come, the shepherd must be steady. That's how the church can be a place of calm, not by having all the answers, but by staying strong when the world is shaking. This wasn't just theory. Pope Francis was handing over responsibility. He was telling Tagle, don't just fix problems, be the calm that people hold on to. That's what true leadership looks like, and it's what the Pope has tried to model during his own time. Finally, the Pope brought it all together with one final thought. He said that none of this would matter unless the church rebuilds trust. That means being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. It means shining a light on things the church has sometimes tried to hide. Financial mistakes, scandals, lack of transparency. Pope Francis wrote that trust isn't something you ask for, it's something you earn. He told Tagle that leading with truth is harder than leading with tradition, but it's the only way forward. This part of the letter showed just how serious the Pope is about the church becoming more honest, not just with others, but with itself. How has this letter shaped Tagle's? Let's find out. How Pope Francis's letter has shaped Luis Antonio Tagle's life. When Pope Francis wrote that letter to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, it wasn't a checklist or a set of orders. It was something much more personal. It read like a father talking to a son, someone passing on a way of life, not just a job. Since that letter, everything Tagle has done seems to carry pieces of those words. You can see it in the way he talks, the way he leads, and the way he moves through the world. The letter became his quiet guide. From the start, one of the biggest things the Pope emphasized was humility. Not the kind people talk about just to sound good, but the kind you live out when no one's watching. Francis saw that in Tagle early on. Back when Tagle was Archbishop of Manila, he never acted like he was above the people.
The new appointed Archbishop of Manila is one of the youngest in the world. The Pope appointed 54-year-old Luis Antonio Tagle, who is mostly known for being a respected theologian from Asia.
He was out there in the streets, sitting with families in their tiny homes, laughing with kids, comforting those who had nothing. The letter praised this, not because it looked nice in the media, but because it was real. The Pope reminded him that leadership in the church should look like this: gentle, close, and honest. That part of the letter helped shape how Tagle would carry himself, even when his role grew on the global stage. As Tagle took on bigger responsibilities in Rome, people wondered if the new titles would change him, but they didn't. The words of that letter stayed with him. He kept showing up with the same soft voice, the same calm smile, the same simple clothes. He didn't want people to follow him because of rank. He wanted them to trust him because he listened. That's exactly what Pope Francis had hoped for when he handed him that letter. It wasn't about creating another church official. It was about forming a shepherd. Another part of the letter hit even deeper, the call to stand with the poor. Not just talk about them, but actually be there with them. The Pope wrote that if the message of the gospel doesn't reach the streets, it stays locked in a building. That line stuck with Tagle. It's why he didn't wait for invitations. He went to slums, he visited survivors after typhoons, and he opened churches as shelters. That wasn't for show. It was because the letter reminded him that serving the poor isn't extra work. It's the heart of it all. Even now, in his role at the Vatican, Tagle hasn't stopped. He keeps traveling to refugee camps, comforted families who have lost everything, and met with people the rest of the world has forgotten. He doesn't stand on stages and deliver speeches about suffering. He sits beside people who are living through it, and he makes sure they are seen. That was something Pope Francis made clear in his letter. The poor don't need perfect words. They need someone who truly cares, and Tagle has lived that line. But the letter didn't stop at service. Pope Francis also talked about how the church must grow without losing its roots. He described it like a tree that stays grounded but keeps reaching out. That's been another big part of how Tagle leads. He respects the church's long history, but he also knows the world is different now. He's brought new ideas into old places. He talks about mental health, and he supports honest discussions about tough issues. He even uses social media, not just to share church updates, but to talk to people like a friend. He's helping the church speak the language of today's world. Pope Francis wrote that the church has to move or it risks being left behind. Tagle took that seriously. He works to keep the faith strong without shutting out progress. He listens, he adjusts, and he makes sure that even when changes come, they don't forget the heart of the faith. That part of the letter helped him find the balance between keeping tradition alive and making room for the future, and part of that future is the young. The letter had a section that was all about them. Pope Francis didn't hide his concern. If the church loses the youth, it loses everything. That was a wake-up call. Tagle already had a special connection with young people, but the letter pushed him to do more. He started creating spaces where young Catholics could speak openly. He didn't talk down to them, he asked them questions, and he listened without interrupting. That's why so many young people feel like he actually understands them. He brings up their struggles, like anxiety, loneliness, or trying to find purpose. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He just shows up, ready to walk with them. That part of the letter helped Tagle realize that leadership in the church today means being close to those who are still trying to figure life out.
Who will succeed Pope Francis? The conclave is still weeks away, but the cardinals now face the immense task of choosing a new leader for the Catholic faithful.
Then came the pandemic, and with it, a big test. The letter had one more line that stood out. When storms hit, a real leader stays steady. Tagle lived that too. Even after he caught COVID-19 himself, he kept working. He helped organize aid for people who lost everything. He sent out messages of hope, not panic. He kept things calm when so much felt like it was falling apart. That wasn't just leadership. That was someone living out every word of that letter. He didn't use fear to control people. He used kindness to steady them. That's exactly what Pope Francis had hoped for when he first sat down and wrote that message to him. Over time, Tagle has become more than just another church leader. He's someone people trust, not because he talks the loudest, but because he stays close. The letter he received years ago wasn't public until recently. But anyone watching him could already see its message. He didn't just read the words, he lived them. Now that the letter is finally out, the world can see what Pope Francis saw in him all along. The timing of the release of this letter is shaking up things and might have huge significance for the Catholic Church. You don't want to miss this final reveal. The impact of this revealed letter on the Catholic Church. Now that the letter has finally come to light, it's starting to change how people inside and outside the Catholic Church are looking at what comes next. With Pope Francis's passing, the timing of this letter becoming public is making people stop and think. Because if you read between the lines, this letter feels like the Pope was pointing Tagle in a very specific direction, toward the chair he himself was about to leave behind. People in the Vatican are already whispering about what this means. Sure, there's always talk after a Pope passes. People wonder who's next, what direction the Church will go, what kind of leader will come in. But with this letter now out in the open, the conversations have shifted. It's not just about who might become Pope. It's about whether Francis had already made it clear who should. And for many people watching closely, all signs point to Tagle. One of the biggest reasons this letter is making waves is because of what it doesn't say outright, but clearly suggests. It doesn't name Tagle as the next Pope. It doesn't make predictions or set any official plan. But the tone of the letter, the lessons it carries, and the responsibility it passes on, it all makes it feel like Pope Francis had been preparing Tagle not just for leadership in general, but for the very top, and that changes everything. It's not uncommon for popes to mentor others, but this kind of mentorship feels deeper. Francis didn't just give Tagle advice, he gave him a mindset. He told him to walk closely with the people, to lead without ego, and to rebuild trust from the ground up. The fact that these were the final themes Pope Francis chose to pass on, knowing that his own time was limited, makes the letter carry even more weight now. The Church today is standing at a crossroads. There's been a lot of division, from how to handle scandals, to debates about doctrine, to how the Church should act in a changing world. What this letter brings is a clear picture of what Francis hoped the future would look like. It's not a future built on more rules or stricter boundaries. It's one based on service, honesty, and being close to those who are hurting. That message has always been part of Francis's way, but now it's also tied to Tagle. People are beginning to see the connection more clearly. In the days since the letter became public, more and more people in the Catholic world are starting to treat Tagle like someone who's next in line, not just because of his rank or role in Rome, but because of what the Pope saw in him. Francis didn't praise his career, he praised his character. And that's a big deal in a church where titles and tradition often speak louder than personality. The Pope wanted someone who could carry forward his vision, not just with words, but with the way they live. Of course, not everyone is happy about this. Some corners of the Church prefer a more traditional path. There are still those who want a stricter, more rule-based leader to come next. They see Tagle as too gentle, too open, maybe even too connected to Pope Francis's way of doing things. But this letter is now pushing those arguments into the spotlight. Because if Francis trusted Tagle with these lessons, and if Tagle has already been living them, then the question becomes, how can the Church ignore that? The other reason this letter matters is because of the moment we're in. With Francis gone, there's a sense of uncertainty. People want direction. They want someone who won't just keep the ship afloat, but will actually guide it somewhere meaningful. The letter paints a picture of what kind of captain Francis believed could do that. Everything in that picture looks a lot like Tagle. Tagle isn't just another bishop or cardinal. He's already been given big responsibilities by Pope Francis, including key roles in spreading the Church's message around the world. He's respected for his gentle style, but he's also known for being clear and strong when it counts. Now, with this letter, we're starting to see that all of this may have been part of a plan, one Francis didn't shout about, but quietly worked toward for years. This letter also matters for the everyday Catholic. People in the pews, especially those who've felt left out or unheard, are paying attention. They see in Tagle someone who speaks their language, someone who doesn't put on airs, someone who reminds them of Francis. With the Church still facing trust issues and global challenges, that kind of connection can make all the difference. People are looking for someone real, someone steady. This letter has helped Tagle stand out as that kind of person. It's too early to say what will happen next. The cardinals will meet, there will be discussions, debates, votes, but this letter has already done something powerful. It has made the possibility of Tagle as the next pope feel not just likely, but natural. Like the next chapter that Francis had already started writing, even before anyone else saw it. What do you think about Pope Francis's letter to Tagle? Kindly share your answers, thoughts, and opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this channel to enjoy more videos like this. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.